I'm reading from Deuteronomy 3:21 through 28. At that time I commanded Joshua, "You have seen with your own eyes all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. The Lord will do the same to all the kingdoms over there where you are going. Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God himself will fight for you." At that time I pleaded with the Lord, "O sovereign Lord, you have begun to show to your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do the deeds and mighty works you do? Let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that fine hill country and Lebanon." But because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. "That is enough," the Lord said. "Do not speak to me any more about this matter. Go up to the top of Pisgah and look west and north, south and east. Look at the land with your own eyes, since you are not going to cross the Jordan. But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he will lead this people across and will cause them to inherit the land that you will see."
Each of us at some time in our life has gone through the trauma of praying to God, trusting fully that He would answer our prayers and grant our request, only to have nothing happen. And all sorts of things cross our minds. Is there really a God? Are His promises true? Does He really love me? Or is all this Christianity stuff just a big crock? Now, if you haven't resolved those questions at least in some way, you probably wouldn't even be here today. So I know that I'm not telling you something new and enlightening when I say that God does answer all your prayers. It is just that sometimes the answer is no. Or sometimes the answer is something other than what we requested. God does answer when you pray. You can know that. As I thought about the different ways that God answers or responds to our prayers, there seems to be several general ways. Sometimes God says no. Sometimes God says slow. Sometimes God says grow. And sometimes God says go. God may say no because the motive of your prayer may not be right. We may pray believing that we know what is best for us, but God may have other plans. Know that His plan is best. A child will ask a parent for something that is not good for him, something that is potentially harmful to himself or to others. And a parent will tell him no, or a coach will tell him no, you have to play the outfield. In the same way, God says no to us. Sometimes our prayers are selfish, or they are unworthy of an affirmative response. James 4:3 says, "When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures." We all ask for things with wrong motives sometimes, and God knows that. And so He says no, because that is the answer that is best for us. Now, you need to be careful of the prayers that you make when you're discouraged, or when you're angry, or when you're upset. You need to be careful about what your desires are at those times. Because when you pray with wrong motives, God will say no because basically you're just thinking about yourself and there are more things to be thinking about. And when He does say no, that could be the very best thing that could ever happen to you. There are times that you really don't want the answer to be yes to some of your prayers when you ask with wrong motives, because a yes answer can sure backfire on you. And God may even do that at times so that you learn not to pray with wrong motives. But usually He just says, no, that's not the right thing for you to pray for. You can't have it because I love you and I want to do what's best for you. There are many examples of great men of God to whom God said no. Job, in his misery, prayed for deliverance, but God said no. Elijah, running from Jezebel, prayed that he would die, and God said no. He had something different in mind for Elijah. God said no to Moses, as Darlene read for us in our text for today. Moses asked specifically to be able to cross the Jordan, to see the promised land. But God said, no, enough of this. Don't even speak to me about this anymore. God will say no to an unworthy prayer when that prayer is contrary to His plan, when that prayer is not in His name, when that prayer is not for His purpose, when you are not delighting yourself in the Lord. Psalm 37:4 says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." Now, just because God says no does not necessarily mean that you're praying with wrong motives. A prayer might be very worthy and very well-intentioned, but God's plan may include something better and farther reaching than your prayers could ever even include or comprehend. And so the question then is, are you willing to accept the answer no from God, believing that He has something greater in mind than you could ever even think to ask? Because God even said no to Jesus. Jesus asked His Heavenly Father if the cup could be taken away. He asked to not have to be crucified. And that was not an unworthy prayer. That was not wrong motives. It was just the prayer of His heart. And imagine how that must have broken the heart of God to have to say no to that. But out of His great love for you and for me, His all-encompassing plan to save us from the punishment of our own sin, God said no to His only Son and let Him be sacrificed to die on the cross. And Jesus obeyed, and He willingly went to that cross. God's knowledge is best. We may question, we may not understand, but be assured God's knowledge is best. And sometimes God just says no. Came across one of those blurbs on the internet that I thought was pretty good. It's entitled, "God Said No." I asked God to take away my habit. God said no. It is not for me to take away, but for you to give it up. I asked God to make my handicapped child whole. God said no. His spirit is whole. His body is only temporary. I asked God to grant me patience. God said no. Patience is a byproduct of tribulations. It isn't granted, it is learned. I asked God to give me happiness. God said no. I give you blessings. Happiness is up to you. I asked God to spare me pain. God said no. Suffering draws you apart from worldly cares and brings you closer to me. I asked God to make my spirit grow. God said, no, you must grow on your own, but I will prune you to make you faithful. I asked God for all things that I might enjoy life. God said, no, I will give you life so that you may enjoy all things. I asked God to help me love others as much as He loves me. God said, finally you have the idea. God says no sometimes to our prayers, and when He does that, you can actually be thankful for that. God may say no because the motive of your prayer is not right. Or God may say slow because the timing of your prayer is not right. God may delay the answer because God's timing is always better than our timing. I remember when I was a child, the standard put-off I got from my parents was, we'll see. Dad, can I do this, or can I do that, or can I have that? And often the answer is, we'll see. And that answer could have meant a lot of different things. It could have meant, well, I'm in the middle of something important right now, so don't bug me. Or it could have meant, I'll have to check with your mother. That's usually what it meant. Or it could have meant, we'll have to see what else is going on, but I don't know the answer right now. But at any rate, the answer could have been yes, or it could have been no, but I wasn't going to find out about that answer until later. I think it drives kids nuts to be told that. They want to know right away what the answer is going to be. And of course, they want the answer to be yes. But kids figure out what we'll see means. Sometimes the answer will be yes, but sometimes it's no. But either way, they have to wait to find out. Well, God deals with us the same way sometimes. He delays the answer because His timing is better than ours. Various people in the Bible express disappointment and dismay that God didn't answer their prayers. David, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, all accuse God of not hearing them. But in the end, God came through with an answer. We all have a tendency to just want to move ahead of God and want things to go according to our timetable. God has a much broader perspective than we do, and we can know that His timetable is best. Many of you have probably experienced a time when you prayed for something and things didn't work out at the time or in the way that you wanted. But then later, when you look back at the situation, you saw that God was working all the time. You saw how He was in control, and you saw how He worked things out better than you ever could have even prayed for. In the meantime, it is very hard to sit back and to wait. It's hard to feel that God is really working and that God really cares about even those small details in your life, like your preacher's always telling me about. But He does care, and He is working. The answer may be delayed. The answer may end up being no, or it could be yes, but the answer is coming. It could be that your motive is still not right, and so the answer is still no. It could be that the timing is not right, and so the answer is slow. You've got to wait it out a little bit longer. Or God's answer to your prayer may be grow, because you are not right. Anyone who grew up with older brothers and sisters remembers being told, wait until you're older and then you'll be able to do what your brother and sister is doing. And it was exasperating to hear that then, but you can understand now that it was for your own safety. You were not permitted to do something because you were too small or you were just not mature enough to do it. You can get hurt if you tried, but when you grew some more, then you would be able to do it safely. Well, God says no to our prayers sometimes because we need to grow spiritually before we can handle the results of our prayer. Look at James chapter 1, verses 6 through 8 with me. It says, but when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all he does. Perhaps it's doubt or some other instability in your life, but God may be telling you that you need to grow before you can handle what it is that you're asking for. God knows you. God knows what you can handle and what you can't. In the same way, God may allow you to go through a certain trial so that you can be strengthened in your faith. Or He may withhold certain blessings that you're asking for or other things that you pray for because He knows that you're just not ready to deal with it. I think of Elisha, who prayed for a double portion of the Spirit that Elijah had. What a bold request. And God did grant that request, I assume, because of the spiritual maturity of Elisha. But I imagine that if most anyone else had asked that same question and requested that same thing, that God would have said, no, you're not quite ready for that. You have some growing to do before you know what to do with that. Jesus said several times that it's very difficult for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. And it's not because wealth is wrong. It's just that it's very difficult to handle having a lot of money and still allowing God to be the priority of your life. It's difficult to have a lot of material things and still put God first. It's difficult to have everything go your way, just how you want it and just how you prayed for it, and still continue to learn and to grow and to depend on God and to trust Him every day. Maybe you have prayed for wealth, or at least financial security, and you can't understand why you just have to struggle by paycheck to paycheck. Well, join a large club. But God knows what He's doing. At this time in your life and your Christian growth, you might be better off struggling by than to be ruined by something that is very difficult to handle. You might say, Lord, go ahead and ruin me, but I don't think you really mean that. Maybe there's something else that you've been asking for, but God keeps saying no. Maybe there is some growing that you need to do before you're going to get the answer that you want. It was hard as a child to be told that you needed to grow up first, and it's no easier as an adult to be told that you need to grow. But none of us has reached a level of spiritual maturity where we no longer need to grow. Any one of us might be told no by God because we first need to grow in some area of our spiritual lives. Even the Apostle Paul prayed for God to remove his thorn in the flesh, whatever that was, and God said no. He said, no, Paul, you need this thorn to help you to grow. And if Paul had room to grow, then you know that you and I sure do. So when you pray, God's answer might be no because your motive is not right. It might be slow because the timing is not right. Or it might be grow because you are not right. But most importantly, when you pray, God's answer may be go because everything is right. It must amaze God that when He answers prayer that we all seem surprised. When most of the time, God's answer is yes. God's answer is go. Go for it. Everything is right. Your motives are pure. The timing is right. You're ready to assume the responsibilities of answered prayer. In fact, I would say that we can assume that this is what God's answer is going to be. You can always pray, expecting God to answer yes. And if he doesn't, then there's a reason for it. But he wants to answer yes. He wants to give us the desires of our heart. But he wants the desires of our heart to be in line with his desires. But so often God does answer yes, but we think that God is just going to do everything and lay everything out for us. Like we placed an order down at Chick-fil-A and we're going to bring it out on a tray to us. Sometimes answered prayer is only realized when we take action on what God has provided. God has done so much for us. All we have to do is to use what he has given us. We must use the mind, the mouth, the hands, and the legs that he has provided for us. I think everybody here has at least full use of one of those things. God says yes far more often than he says no. Most of the time we just don't realize it, or we don't believe it, or we don't act on it. For instance, you can pray for health, but if you don't get your sleep, you don't exercise, you don't eat right, you can't say that God has said no to your prayer. God's answer is most likely, yes, I want you healthy so that I can use you for my kingdom to be fruitful. You could pray for our church to grow, and God's answer to that is most very likely yes. But still, it will not happen unless you witness to your friends, unless you invite your neighbors, unless you visit prospects, unless you are faithful and remain faithful to your obligations and your commitments. You might pray for a job, and God might have just the one for you. But still, you must go and put together a resume, submit applications, do the legwork. Maybe you're sick, and you ask God for healing, and he is ready to do that, and all you have to do is to get up and move. You wouldn't know for sure unless you tried. Now, it can be very hard sometimes to know what God is saying. What is his answer to your prayers? And I don't have an easy answer to tell you how you're supposed to know. All I can say is to keep praying until you do know. Some people say, well, if you have faith, then all you need to do is to pray once. God isn't deaf. You don't need to keep repeating yourself. Well, that's true, of course. But to me, the very essence of faith and prayer is your personal relationship with the Lord. And relationships change constantly. They grow, they falter, they're affected by circumstances. Your hopes and your desires change. So what I'm saying is keep talking to God. Keep that relationship fresh and vibrant. Keep praying until you receive your answer. The answer just might be no, because your motives are just not right. It might be slow because the timing's not right. It's not the same as God's timing. The answer might be grow because you are not quite where you should be in your spiritual walk. But most likely the answer is go. Take off and go with what God provides for your hopes and your dreams. And know this, God never fails. His knowledge, his timing, his wisdom are always perfect, and he wants so much to be able to say yes to your prayers. In closing, thus let me read some of the assurances of Psalm 37, written by David, who knew what it felt like to be told no by God. He writes in some selected verses here in Psalm 37, "If the Lord delights in a man's way, he makes his steps firm. Though he stumble, he will not fall, for the Lord upholds him with his hand. Turn from evil and do good, then you will dwell in the land forever. For the Lord loves the just and will not forsake his faithful ones. Wait for the Lord and keep his way. He will exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, you will see it. The salvation of the righteous comes from the Lord. He is their stronghold in time of trouble. The Lord helps them and delivers them. He delivers them from the wicked and saves them because they take refuge in him." If you would like to receive these promises that are given to the righteous, you must know that you can only be righteous by trusting in Jesus to save you from your sins and making you a new creation, acceptable to God through Christ's blood, and given access to that almighty throne of grace through faith in him, so that you can pray, you can talk to God, and you can await his answer. If there's anyone here who has not done that, that's the first step you need to take. We invite you to accept Christ as your own personal Lord and Savior. Also, if there's anyone here who has already done that, but you'd like to decide to commit yourself to serving him here in this church and to be a member of Spinning Road Baptist, we too invite you to make a decision public by coming forward as we sing a hymn of invitation. Then after our hymn, we will share together in the Lord's Supper. But first of all, let's sing together our hymn of invitation.